The What to Read Next podcast helps you build a TBR of future favorite books. In each episode, Lauren and Maine interviews authors and book influencers to recommend books they loved for you to pick up today. If you're an avid reader, always looking for your next great read, then the show's for you. Hi, Rachel. Welcome to What to Read Next podcast.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm great.
So happy to have you here. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a New York City public school teacher. I've been teaching for 22 years, mostly 8th grade ELA. It's been a while. I'm also an actor sometimes. I've acted actually in several true crime reenactment shows on an Investigation Discovery. I'm also a fun fact about me is that I'm an amateur aerialist. I take flying trapeze classes and lyra classes, which is aerial hoop. So.
Oh my gosh, I love this. I live in New York City and I wanted to go to aerial school after I saw the Sex and the City episode, but I was afraid of heights. Yeah. I don't think this is going to be the right thing for me.
That's a good way to get over fear of heights real fast.
Yeah. I'm like, it sounds great on paper, but I'm like, oh my God. So how do you get into it? What led you to get
Oh my
started?
God. Into aerials. We went for a friend's bachelorette party and my one friend and I looked at each other like, we have to come back. And then that was it. We were hooked.
That
was like about 10, 12 years ago. So.
Oh my gosh. And so how do you get into true crime investigative discovery, reenact?
It's interesting. It kind of ties together with the writing of the book because I started writing my book in 2009 and sort of hit an impasse. And I think I wrote about that in the book a little bit. And at the time, I was dating someone who was an actor, and I had done acting in college and a little bit of stage acting throughout the years. And my partner was like, you should come to this music video shoot. So I did. And I realized I really liked film acting. And I just decided I would give it a go. Got headshots, made a resume, and started getting cast in small parts that filmed in New York City. And ID, Investigation Discovery, actually does a lot of shoots in New York City. So my first speaking role was pretty soon after I started trying, and it was on A Crime to Remember, which is kind of like crimes from the past. Really, really excellent wardrobe and hair and makeup on that show.
Oh my gosh, that sounds fascinating. I know a lot of actors, and so it's great to know like you found like a niche. I accidentally you realize, oh, like this is kind of fun, and then give it a next step.
Yeah, and I sort of it also I think that it helped me realize what genre I needed to write it in a strange way. It's like, oh, that's right, true crime is a genre, and I started studying it more because of that.
So what led you to true crime? Like what fascinates you about true crime?
To be honest, it kind of went the other way. I was sort of fascinated by my own stepsister's murder rather than the genre. And I always was drawn to her story and wanted to write about her and wasn't sure what to write. When I started writing in 2009, I didn't know what form it would take. I was just sort of free writing. Some of it felt like memoir. Some of it felt like fictionalized narrative. Some of it at one point, I think I was telling this story recently at the Tucson Book Festival, but I met Art Spiegelman at the 92nd Street Y, and I thought, oh, I'll write a graphic novel, which it did not turn out to be. So I really didn't. It was more like true crime found me rather than I found it, Then acting in those ID shows, I realized, oh, right, this, of course, this is the genre, and then I don't know what draws me to it. Just it seems to shine a light on facets of humanity that we don't always look at, or that maybe we're uncomfortable looking at, but are very much a part of the human experience.
Yeah, let's chat about your book. Tell us all about it.
Yeah. When I was 14 years old, my music teacher's daughter, who was 27 at the time, and a music teacher up in Greece, New York, which is right next to Rochester, seemingly vanished overnight. And so I was 14, which is kind of the right age to find that sort of thing striking, and it kind of stuck with me. And he was my teacher. So I was observing him, and seeing how he seemed to respond, which was very stoically. Actually, he was a Ukrainian refugee himself, my stepfather, my music teacher, who became my stepfather. And the way that he'd learned to deal with the tragedies of his life and the struggles of his life was with grit and stoicism, so that is how he responded to the disappearance of his daughter as well. When I was 19, my parents got divorced and we ended up moving right next door to him. And my mom met him. So, well, we knew him, they knew each other because my sisters and I were all music students. So he was familiar with our family, and they met, fell in love, got married, and she became sort of retroactively my stepsister. This person who I had already been sort of fixated on the disappearance of became my stepsister. There was a photograph of her next to the wedding cake at my mom and stepdad's funeral. She at that time had been missing for about 6 years, about six or 7 months after the wedding. There were 2 little boys who were fishing in a stream in upstate New York and discovered her remains. So in 1998, it became a homicide. I was always really fascinated is not quite the right word, but drawn to Stephanie's story. And one thing that was sort of otherworldly was that my stepfather, as he got older, he had Parkinson's disease. And as he got older, it developed into Parkinson's related dementia. But even before that, he would always say that my eyes were just like Stephanie's. And then he began to conflate us into one person, like he would confuse us a lot or mistake me for her. So that added sort of this level of eeriness to the whole thing. And I just wanted to know who she was. So my book is kind of an intimate look into a pretty complex crime. But because I have the distance of never having met her, it has some elements of investigative journalism, sort of the detachment of investigative journalism. But because she was my family member, it's quite intimate as well. I yearned to know her, right? But I couldn't. So the best I could do was speak to everyone who had known her and attempt to recreate her as well as I could. So my book is an attempt to honor her by telling her life story and how vibrant and wonderful and flawed she was, and also to tell the story of her disappearance and her murder, as well as the sort of parallel tale of the very corrupt police department that managed her case and the way that the corruption may have affected the outcome of her case, or the environment that the case was being worked on.
So, and you start working this in 2009, so it's been almost 13 years.
I took a long break. And that's when I was doing that acting. 2015 is when I decided, okay, I'm going to do it for real. Unbeknownst to me, in 2009, her case had actually been reopened. It had gone somewhat cold from 2000, when Dave Connors, the original investigator, retired, until 2009, which was the year that the police chief ended up going to jail. And the new police chief, in an effort to reinstill faith in the police department, opened up some cold cases, and Stephanie's was one of them. So I didn't even know that had happened. One thing I learned in the time when I wasn't working on the book was that her case had been reopened and a lot of work had been done on it. So in 2015, I emailed Sandra Dorley, the DA of Monroe County, and just said, hey, I'm interested in learning about my stepsister's story. She said, come on up to Rochester. I'll pull everything I have for you, and gave me a CD with 700 files on it. So it was like just opening a doorway into a hallway filled with doorways was pretty intense, going through those 700 files, and I learned a lot about victimhood, about abuse, about law enforcement, and about perpetrators of crimes themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what was the journey to publication, from writing to then having this book published?
It was a long journey. I had one agent at the beginning who sort of took a gamble on me because I didn't have much written. And then we creatively didn't really see eye to eye. So amicably parted ways. And thanks to her, my proposal was improved. And then I had a second literary agent who eventually left the industry, but thanks to her, my manuscript was improved and finished. And then I finally found my miraculous agent, Dan Conaway at Writer's House. It's just sort of like everything I had to have a lot of faith in the project. I had to really believe that this story was worth telling. And people kept telling me that it was, and assuring me that it was, including people involved in it. They said this story, Sandra Dorley, the DA, said this is a story that has to be told. So I just kept, I just held fast to that idea that it would be told and it would come to fruition. And I kind of saw the obstacles as stepping stones rather than obstacles, and ended up exactly where I needed to be with exactly the agent I needed to have to promote it. And then almost kismet, my editor, Daniel Lodell, he wrote a book called Hades, Argentina, which I recommend, which is fiction, but sort of based on his real life family story, because his sister was disappeared in Argentina. So it was very sort of, we understand one another's desire to tell the story of a family member who vanished, who we did not know. We had that in common. And then after that, it kind of all moved pretty quickly.
That's amazing. Well, I know it's a lot of it. So I think people expect the writing process to be linear, and it's not. It's like it's a step at a time, and sometimes you have to take 2 steps back, 1 step forward, or somehow a connection, or somehow something will improve and something will take you to the next level, or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think I finished the first draft in the fall of 2017, and then everything was revision for about 3 years, and it's a sad thing to tell my eighth graders because they don't want to believe me that revision is so important. They just want to finish a draft and be done. And I'm like, nope, I'm living proof. I wrote a draft in 1 year and then revised it for 3, Yeah. So
That's amazing. And so what are you working next? Are you going to keep writing, or
I'm actually on a sabbatical from teaching for 6 months so that I'm free to do things like this, and travel if I need to. But I'm also doing a lot of research on, there was actually a fire that happened at a hotel in the same town where Stephanie was murdered, which I discussed briefly in the book. It was one of the other cold cases that was reopened by the new chief, Todd Baxter. In 1978, there was a hotel fire, which was subsequently declared an arson, and 10 people died in that fire. So if it's an arson, it's 10 homicides, and it's still unsolved. So it's a long 40-year saga, over 40 years now, saga of this fire and all of the twists and turns and politics and possible suspects and all that stuff. So it's a bit harder to research because it's completely unsolved, and the authorities have sort of hit some dead ends with it. So, but there's a large community of people that wants closure. I say that word, but I don't actually believe much in the concept of closure. But I do think that it's a story that is worth being told, and I do think that it has been a trauma on a community. And so I'm kind of interested in thinking about, trauma can affect an individual. Like the murder of my stepsister affected individual people, right? But this fire seems to have traumatized an entire town, so I'm kind of thinking a lot lately about like, community psyche as opposed to individual psyche, and how this fire might still be burning in the minds of the people of that town.
This is fascinating. I love the fact that you're following the leads. Essentially, you're an investigator. You're trying to investigate.
Yeah.
Look at
Stephanie's story started out very much as an individual experience for me to write about. And the elements of investigative journalism, that was a complete surprise to me how much I found myself engaged in it and galvanized by that experience and propelled forward to find more and more and more. It makes me very curious.
Yeah, I love this. So let's chat some book recommendations. Do you have any books you recommend our listeners to pick up?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of my favorite true crime, I would say, if I were thinking about books that had affected me the most, I would definitely say Lost Girls by Robert Kolker, about the murdered sex workers whose bodies were found at Gilgo Beach on Long Island. And I also really love People Who Eat Darkness by Richard Lloyd Parry. Those two books, I would say, probably influenced me more than other true crime books. I in no way, shape, or form would ever compare myself to the incredible Joan Didion, but The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion is probably the book that made me want to write memoir. It's raw and it's honest and it's metacognitive, and I aspire to those things when I write memoir as well. But I think one of my favorite books is this is a weird one out of left field, but Oh Pioneers by Willa Cather. I really love Willa Cather. She's sort of an unspoken member of the American canon who often gets overlooked, but I think she's really important. I'm reading young adult true crime, which I teach middle school, right? So now I'm a true crime writer, and I've been thinking about if there's a place for true crime in a middle school classroom. I'm actually doing, for my sabbatical research project, I'm researching the effect of true crime on middle school readers and how it might affect their social literacy and their literacy. What kinds of ideas and concepts they find themselves discussing. So I'm working with my own students. They're super psyched because I think they miss me kind of. So I'm seeing about 20 of them on Monday afternoon, and we're going to be discussing The 57 Bus by Dashka Slater. So if anyone has teenage kids and loves true crime, that's a really great book. It's about a non-binary teen who may or may not have been the victim of a hate crime on board a bus in Oakland, California. I also just finished, it's called The Borden Murders, I think. Yeah, The Borden Murders. It's actually like a young adult true crime book about Lizzie Borden, but it's really a demystifying of all of the urban legends around her. So that's interesting. And then the other book that I'm reading that I just finished is From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry: The Killing of Vincent Chin and the Trial That Galvanized the Asian American Movement. And that's by Paula Yu. And that's another one that I'm going to be reading with my students. So those are that's my trio of YA true crime. And then I'm also separately reading, what is it? I'm reading Winds of War by Herman Wouk. Have you read that ever?
No, I'm not.
It's a big fat book, like 800 pages, but it's my partner's favorite book. And I was kind of like, all right, let me try to understand you a little bit more. So I'm attempting to read that. It's taking me a long time. It's kind of like a World War II historical epic thing. I like it, but I'm reading it in chunks and putting it down, and then reading a whole other book and then going back to Winds of War. And then I'm also reading, I had the pleasure of being on a panel with Joshua Moore at the Tucson Festival of Books. And I'm reading his book, Model Citizen, which is an amazing memoir about his voluntary relapse from sobriety. He had been sober for about 10 years And then he had 3 strokes in 1 year and discovered he had to have heart surgery. And one of the treatments was fentanyl. And so he had to take fentanyl in order to save his life. So he had to basically voluntarily relapse. And so it's a great book. It's very, I don't want to say the word raw again, but it's very, and his prose it reminds me of like, I don't know, Dennis Johnson or something like that. Yeah.
I love this. I love these recommendations. I love the young adult true crime recommendations the most because it's so niche, but I feel like if people are looking for it and they're like, oh, there is the
It
market.
is niche, right? And it's like, where does it exist? And my students are really, I mean, they are into true crime. They watch ID, sometimes like, did I see you on ID? And I'm like, yes, that was me, and they know I wrote this book and they're like, oh, can I read it? And I'm like, I don't know if it's really for 13-year-olds, so I know there is like a craving in the teen mind to learn about these things, but it needs to be appropriate, for their, not just content wise, but prose wise and style wise, I'm trying to find things for them.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited about my research.
That's a great research to do. So I can't wait to see what you come up with. So tell us where we can find you online.
Online, you can find me. I have a recently created Facebook author page, which is just my name, Rachel Rear. Twitter is a great place to follow me. Also, it's at Ray Rear, RAEREAR. And I have a website, www.rachelrear.com.
Thank you, Rachel, for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share with friends, subscribe, rate, and review the show. This is the easiest way to support the podcast. Today's episode's partner is Libra FM. If you're an audiobook listener, then you should add Libra FM as your go-to source for paid audiobooks. Libra FM makes it possible for you to buy audiobooks through your local bookstore. Memberships start at $14.95, and they also have great sales for women's audiobooks each month for $3.99, thanks to the Kiss Club. To sign up for Libra FM, please visit whattoreadnextblog.com/LibraFM. You will receive a free audiobook when you sign up for a monthly subscription. If you purchase a subscription through our link, you will be supporting the podcast at no cost to you. The What to Read Next podcast is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Please visit frolic.media/podcast to discover new shows to tune in. Thank you so much for listening and have a great day.